Welcome to Gin and Tantra, spirituality with a twist. The podcast that takes Tantrism, Buddhism, Taoism, Sufism, Kabbalism, Shamanism, Chinese medicinism, and all of the other isms we've been influenced by, and blends them into a tall, crisp, cool cocktail your spirit has been longing for.
I want you to get together.
Now, isn't that refreshing?
I want you to get together.
Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. This episode is something a little different. It's hard to say what order people may be listening to these, but currently we're doing a series on sort of the basics of spiritual practice and philosophy, kind of the stages of the path. So that's going on. We're continuing that. We're doing interviews, some really interesting interviews with the spiritually interesting. We have a new one out with Aaron Greenberg, who's a co-founder of this thing called Biograph Books, which is going up, and his whole job is recording people's life stories. So that's a really interesting one. But also along with those things, and we have other interviews on the way, but also along with those things, we wanted to do episodes on, subjects of transcendent interest, things that are just interesting, related to spirituality and life. And so we're going to start doing ones that are more about love and spirituality, and sexuality. And it's kind of interesting because, we chose the name Gin and Tantra. That was sort of Daniel's invention. I kind of did the spirituality with a twist part. So it kind of came from both of our minds, and it kind of captured the essence of what we wanted the show to be about. But then we sort of purposely held off a little bit on talking about some of the things that might be really obvious with a name like that, like sexuality and love and relationships. And there's sort of some reasons behind it. I guess we both felt a little bit. So what do you think about that, Daniel? We did kind of wait a little bit, given the name of the show.
Yeah, we did wait a little bit. And I think there's a couple of reasons. One, I think, was to just kind of give, at least the people who are following us, regularly listening to us, for most of the episodes that we put out, just to kind of build a little bit of a relationship and our own voices in terms of what we believe in and what we're trying to do with our work here. And I felt like that was a quick dive, a little bit too deep right away. And I wanted to kind of hold off just so that we can kind of build, again, like a little rapport, like you would be building with a new relationship or with a patient or a new friend or something like that, trying to find common ground.
Kind of interesting thought. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's kind of a good point. It's kind of like if you start talking about really hypersexual things right from Jump Street, it's a little, I don't know. You're right. It could be a bit much, right?
Right. And it's also, I think, something along the lines of like, you can't just go right in for the thing, right? You kind of have to dance around a little bit and do the courtship, right? So
yeah.
Holding hands and staring in each other's eyes and, doing the foreplay, so to speak. And so I think,
it's funny in the tantras themselves, they really talk about that. They talk about, things start when the two people, smile at each other, their eyes meet, and then they have the metaphor of the lovers holding hands, and then they talk about kind of kissing, and then it comes to the embrace part last. But there's a kind of a build, right? Yeah, I hadn't really, when we had talked about this in the pre-show meeting, I hadn't thought about that part, that you want to build towards that and get people to know what we're trying to do here a little bit more before we went to those subject matters. That's a good point.
Yeah, well, I could be spontaneous, so this is this is that spontaneity right here.
Yeah. Okay, so that was part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely. I mean, that's a big part for me. That was probably the biggest part. Just kind of holding off, so that people feel like that we are. After you listen to people talk for several hours, and for those who listen to most of our episodes or some of our episodes, I feel like there's a good sense of our personalities out there now, so that not only are we relatively entertaining, but also people who are trustworthy. And you can kind of tell that from episode to episode. There are conscious themes that we're trying to bring up and approach and tackle even with our guests, that we still have the things that we're trying to present to people, and that this is one of them. And hopefully now that people feel a little bit like we're in their homes, in their lives a little bit.
Yeah, there's kind of a trust part of it. That's a good point. Mm-hmm. So that was the main part for you. Anything else in that?
No, those two for me it's the trust and the foreplay.
Yeah, you don't want to like takes a little build, right? You want a little slow
Yeah,
loving, right?
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, man. You gotta warm
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah. I think I had the feeling too that I didn't want the whole show just to end up about we're doing tantra, and it wanted to go like the version of tantra we're doing is kind of deep, right? Not just about sexuality, or just not about sexual technique or those kinds of things. I wanted to present tantra as kind of a full spiritual path, right? Embedded in things that are beyond just the way a lot of times people could think about it here, which might be a little bit more new agey, and we're not against new agey, but we're not doing that exactly. So yeah, I think that was kind of important too, that we kind of set a tone that was showing, we're treating this as kind of a spiritual subject matter where things that have to do with love and sexuality can be a part of it, but it's part of a deeper and bigger tradition. So I thought that was kind of important too. Did you think about that as well?
Yeah, I did, but I figured you were going to mention that, so I'll let you touch on it.
See, we know each other, right? There's a trust. Yeah. Everyone has a bond and a trust in this whole thing.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so when we were looking at how to do this, we decided to start with talking more about the love and relationship, into the deep parts of that, which is even the whole concept of, deeper karmic connections between people, soulmates, if you will, and those kinds of deep loves as the starting off point. And so I guess the first thing to really, for both of us to kind of talk about love is, what do you think about those things? Do you think there's such a thing as a soulmate thing? How do you think about love? How do you think about how it connects to spirituality? We were talking back and forth in the prep for this, and you just sent me 1-2 word text, which was just like deep subject. And I was like, yeah, pretty much so. But it's G&T. We go for the deep subjects. We don't shy away. So whatever you had to say is preliminary to that, I guess. What do you think about those things? I don't know if we talked about it. Do you believe there's a soulmate thing, or how do you think about that?
So there's a couple things here. First off is I'd say the standard definition of a soulmate is actually quite limiting, right? Generally, people believe that your soulmate is somebody who you're quote unquote supposed to be paired with, and they are the completion of you. And that's it. You're bonded on a soul level, or this is the person who's going to, make you feel happy for the rest of your life and loved and all that, stuff like that. And I'm just not so sure if there's a singular answer for that. And because I don't necessarily agree with the definition of that idea of a single soulmate. I personally am more of a belief that we probably work together in small tribes, or maybe even larger tribes. I don't know the exact number, but that people have roles in their lives. So, our souls are mated in a number of different ways that we help each other throughout our lives. And maybe that's as a romantic partner, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. I mean, like yourself, in my life, you have a great influence from me, professionally and personally, and hopefully, I do for you as well. So essentially, our souls are doing this thing where we're able to express, various things that we believe in, and hopefully can illuminate those for other folks as well. Maybe there's new information or repetition of things they've already thought, and now they know that other people believe in that same kind of way. So that has an extremely important part of my life, as as I know it does for you, because we've been talking about doing this for years now. So there's a deep aspect to that I think goes beyond just the view of the typical quote unquote soulmate, which is really only limited to romantic / sexual love.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we're going to go through and talk about where that whole idea comes from about your one fated partner. I think that's an interesting thing to talk about when we get back to it. But I think I agree. You could probably have different kinds of soulmate, quote unquote, type experiences. It might be a teacher. It might be like the two of us trying to do this shared mission that we're doing here, right? Our souls are involved in a joint important project that means a lot to both of us, right? This is definitely a labor of love, of the heart for both of us doing this podcast, right? Or, if you have kids in your life, right? They're kind of soulmates to you in their way, So I think if you do make it too narrow, you only think about that one romantic connection, and it has to be, in that whole mythos of just that. I think maybe you've done a little bit of injustice to what the connections are between people. You have made it too narrow, When my daughter was born, I have a 17-year-old, and it was interesting. Like, it's a well-known fact that I was like a reluctant parent.
Mm-hmm.
I could have gone my whole life and not had any kids, and I would have been fine. But I know when my daughter was born, almost immediately, I had this feeling like, oh, okay, you and me, we're in something together. I think a lot of parents probably have that experience, and it was like instantaneous. I was like, yeah, you and I are kind of like, we're two peas in a pod,
Mm-hmm.
in some way or another. And, yeah, so there's all kinds of connections, and I definitely could think of, even with my daughter, there were parts of my personality that very quickly changed.
Hmm.
It was kind of, I'm self-reflective, meditative person, right? This, right? And I was like, this is changing very quickly, some negative parts of my personality, parts of me that were a little bit more, I don't know, bluesy, or could be a little bit more, should we go there? Be a little bit more maudlin. The more sad parts of my personality, everyone has those, they were just kind of like, no, there's no room for that anymore, and it wasn't like it's something I had to like challenge in myself. They just kind of went up in smoke like really fast. It's interesting. So yeah, so I agree, if you make it too narrow, I think yeah, you're gonna be selling the idea kind of short. Yeah.
I also think that, and maybe let's go there real quick. What, where does that idea come from?
Okay. So, there's a lot of stuff about this, and I'm drawn to some of it for sure if we get to the personal side. Mm-hmm. So if you get to the concept of a soulmate and you kind of trace it back, there's definitely a part that goes back to Greek thought, right? And it goes all the way back to Plato. And in Plato, there's a part where, there's all based on dialogues, right? And there's a part where there's all the great thinkers of Greece are kind of together, and they're talking about love. And there's Euripides, the playwright, who kind of has the most creative version of this. And he tells this kind of longer story about how human beings used to be, twice of what they normally are. They were these kind of big, fantastical creatures. And the gods were intimidated by them because they looked like they had too much power. So I think it's Zeus in the story, as the one who does initiate this. He's like, no, these creatures, we got to cut these things down to size, so they developed a scheme, which is to cut human beings in half. And in doing that, they sliced them and they became half of what they were. But now, of course, they were only half of what they were. And so they were like always going to be longing for this experience of their other half. And that's kind of the Greek origin of that. And, what's interesting about it for us as 21st century people, when you look back on it, is they kind of acknowledge that some of the beings that got sliced in half were half male and half female, but some were both sides female. And that led to women longing for other women. And some were half men, and that led to men longing for other men. So in that sense, it was sort of surprisingly, from a 21st century person's point of view, kind of surprisingly progressive. There was an allowance for people longing for, their other half in different kinds of ways, right? That, I think now, in the early parts of the 21st century, people are like, a lot of people are really comfortable with that idea now. So,
right.
So that's kind of the Greek version of it, right? I got interested in it because it comes up in the Kabbalah.
Yes. Yeah. This is where I'm.
Yeah. So there's one of the great Kabbalistic books, just, for people who are listening, if you're interested in the Kabbalah, there's this, and you want to know a little bit more about it, there's this thing called the Zohar, which is this long series of books that are kind of like commentaries on the Torah, on the books of the Old Testament, but they're really not. They're kind of like, they are and they're not. They're kind of more like a long series of like deep spiritual essays or something like that. And their soulmate does appear there. And it's kind of interesting. It's in the section about Abraham where he leaves his home. So, in the Bible, there's this part where, God says to Abraham, you have to leave your family and you have to leave where you are and go off on kind of a journey, right? So, and then the soulmate part comes up in there. So it's interestingly kind of placed. And the idea there is that people are kind of born with, again, kind of half of themselves, and there's a sort of another half of themselves, and they are kind of longing to find that other half. But it's considered to be kind of a complicated journey, and it's not necessarily like super obvious that that you're going to meet that person in this life, or that they're going to be the person that you are with, maybe have a family with, or whatever. But there is this sort of idea that there's this person kind of out there, which is sort of your other half, and so that's sort of the soulmate idea in the Kabbalah. Is that how you talked about the Kabbalah too?
Yeah, that people are, like you said, born incomplete. The soul is incomplete until it is bonded with another, with the paired soul, the other half of that soul. Until that point, the person essentially is an incomplete individual. And then once they're married, then they can really kind of also begin their spiritual journey as well, because now they have essentially two halves to the coin.
I talked with some Kabbalistic rabbis about this though too, and it's like it is an interesting idea because it's not obvious you're going to meet that person necessarily in this life. And we haven't done the reincarnation part of our conversations on basic spirituality, but in the Kabbalah, they definitely have a sense of people reincarnating. So it might be lives where you'll meet that person and you never come together in any kind of relationship way. And there might be lives where you don't necessarily meet that person at all. And, so it definitely isn't like a Disney movie,
right?
Where, Prince or Princess Charming, whoever it is that you're drawn to, is waiting around the corner, just around the river bend. I think that's the Pocahontas song, right? It's not like It's not like that. It's not obvious that you're necessarily going to find that person. But there's some beautiful passages on it. For people who are really interested in this idea, there are some meditations on this, and there is this notion in the Kabbalah that if you contemplate those passages, it does kind of clarify the energies around this kind of longing. So there are people who seem to have this kind of longing in them for a soulmate. And if you have that longing, there is this idea, even if you just scan the letters in the original Aramaic, it's a kind of a meditation on letters. And so, as you scan the letters, it sort of becomes a meditative thing. It's like a visual, a mantra almost, right? You're not saying the mantra, but your eyes are taking in the mantra of the passage. And they do sometimes recommend that you can do that. So on the practical side, if you want an interesting meditation, that's definitely outside the box. That's a definitely outside the box meditation on the feeling of like longing for a soulmate, right? Yeah. Because I know about you, I've definitely met people who have that longing, right? They do feel that.
Yeah. And it's different than somebody who is just simply longing. You know what I mean? Like looking for, let's say, some holes to be filled, Yeah.
It's not just a sexual longing, right? Yeah.
No. It's something a little bit deeper, but human psychology is it's an enigmatic, I don't know, Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
And I think it's difficult to kind of parse out those two quite often. So I'm when we get into these kinds of discussions, there has to be some credence into the physical aspects of it also, because if someone is lacking for something in their life, this often is a way to make somebody feel more whole. I mean, that's probably part of the reason why we're partnered for, outside of reproductive reasons, and safety, and just, to be more efficient. But we also can't separate the two, so I think this is a very kind of personal thing for people to say, like, I'm looking for the part of myself that isn't here yet,
It's well, I don't know how we'll do as much of the personal part of this. We're presenting the concept, but I had like my own kind of soulmate experiences around this. And I think that's the reason why, even when we've been talking about doing this show, I thought, well, at some point we'll talk about love and we'll talk about these issues because it's going to come up in a show called Gin and Tantra. And I definitely had my own kind of intense feelings of connection with someone very spontaneously. I mean, I've had that experience. I don't think if there'd be like a before and after for me on this subject matter. I think if you asked me before, sort of that set of experiences, I would have been like, well, this is something that, is a cultural thing, people are longing for something and it gets expressed in this way. I would have been much more of like a skeptic about such things. But I did have like sort of these experiences, and I thought, wow, this really is sort of like this. I guess that drew me a little bit into the Kabbalistic conversations about this back in the day too, because I was like, well, what's going on here? What does this mean that I have, sort of this profound feeling of connection, that was, and I definitely, I think like most of our listeners in this, relationships and love and deep feelings of connection with people I've certainly have had, right? And then I had this one kind of very unusual set of experiences, and I was like, okay, this is something else. And then I got to be a little bit more open to the idea. What I think it means isn't obvious to me, but the fact that people have the experience. And I've had a couple of interesting things kind of lately, where there's a couple people that I know who are going through something kind of similar, where they're going through these kinds of very intense feelings of connection with another person. We're going to talk about Rumi and Shams maybe at some point in this episode if we get to it, this one or the next one.
We'll go there. We'll probably go there next.
Yeah,
it feels like it fits.
So like there is this feeling like, oh, there's something about me and this person that's very profound, right? And that's an experience for sure. I mean, I try to be, we've talked about this before, I think here and there, I try to be a little empirical with myself. I try to go, okay, is this an experience or not an experience? If you would have asked me before, I would have been like, I haven't had any experience like that. So I don't know if that's a thing or not. But, when I have an experience, I kind of acknowledge it like, yeah, there's something that can happen very profound between people. It's very moving. That's not too surprising, to say that, of course, that happens. But on some level, I think if you haven't really had that experience for yourself, I don't know. Some people have had that and some people have not, to be honest, right? Some people have had that feeling of, there's some person that there's obviously something transcendently special for me with this person. Or maybe you've had that with more than one person. You feel that transcendence, and some people, to be honest, probably haven't had that too much. What do you think about that? I mean, I've met people who have had, and I've met people who haven't.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I know people who have. I know people who haven't. I find that often they are not with these. They're not partnered with these people. That seems to be a theme. And also,
or the partnerships don't work out, and we'll get to that when we talk about the Shams and Rumi thing, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
It doesn't work out. I think a lot of times that they may have not, that the relationship, it seems to be like on a rocket ship, where it's like you just see them and you're like immediately blown away. Like you're shook on just like first or second look, and it's something. You're trying to describe a feeling, okay, which is difficult to do just in general. It's like trying to describe a picture to somebody who can't see it, or who can't see in general.
Yeah.
And so that's difficult. But then you're trying to describe a very specific feeling that is completely individual, because the way in which we all love and experience love, although we have similar, perception abilities, right? Hearing, touching, feeling, these kinds of things. But it's so different for people because some people are much more of the touchy-feely kind of folks, and some people are much more of the acoustic type, where they need to hear beautiful poetry and that they're adored all the time. And some people like actions and they want to be shown how it is. And so I think these things can be very different for people, just in terms of the aspect of love. But when we're like on the specific, like with the soulmate type thing, I think that people can say definitively, if they had it, they'll say, yes, for sure, I've had it. And if they hadn't, then they're like how you were previously. You're kind of like, well, I don't know, maybe it's a thing, but I've never had it before. There's usually not like a gray area where someone's like, no, Bob from back in the day was not bad. You know what I mean?
That's true.
Maybe him. I think that's possible.
Yeah, if you had this thing, you're like, I think I know. It's like if somebody bashed you in the nose with a hammer. You sort of like remember
yes,
that. You're not like, I can't. Was that it? It does seem to have that. And I've talked with people in the before and after of this for sure. And it's like I said, it's interesting now because I have two people I know who are going through this now in their own ways. I just got a text from one this morning, and we'll get together and we'll chat about such issues. And she's trying to cope with it. Yeah. In this case, it's kind of a separation period between her and the person she feels this with. But, it's something unique. So at the very least, it's an experience, and, being empirical about it, I'd say, yeah, there's the experience. And I suppose in the end, and I guess we'll talk about this as we go through the whole subject matter, I've become kind of a pretty big believer in love and connection with people as part of the spiritual path. I definitely believe in that very strongly. Believe in that is even kind of a weird way to put that, because not everybody has to feel that way. But that's definitely been the thing for me, And I think that runs through part of the show too, in a way, because there obviously are people who are spiritual people who become nuns and monks, and they eschew that part of life. Right. It's not for them in this life. They're going a different way. And of course, that is an admirable and respectable thing to do. The Dalai Lama is a single dude, and he talks about that. And he talks about, wow, love and all those things. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of energy. It's a lot of potential emotional upheaval and pain. He'll talk about that, watching that in people. And he's kind of like, that's not part of my life now in this life, So, some people are going to have that as part of life and some people won't, and that's totally fine. But I think for me, it's become, I think with the accumulated experiences that I had, it became something like, like, at least for me in this life, love matters a lot, right? And, the profundity of this kind of soulmate experience had a big impact on me. And in the aftermath, I think it just made me a more loving person in a way. So, but, everyone's going to have their own experience with this for sure. That's the personal part.
Yeah, I think it's sort of, I think what you said is true. It does make you a more loving person. It sort of cracks you,
Yeah.
like it because it's so personal. It's so unique, the feeling. Even if you experience it with a couple different people, it's so, like, I don't know how to say it. It's intimate and personal at the same time.
Yeah.
That it immediately kind of transcends beyond your levels of rationality or thinkiness to fend it off, to reason it away to this or that, or, oh, they just look good today, or, I'm horny or something like this,
Or they find that person sexually attractive, which is probably true, but doesn't seem to encapsulate it in any way. It doesn't.
Yeah,
it isn't the root even on some level. It's just a piece.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it goes, it's like it just sinks right in, like a drop of water in a crack of a rock. It goes right to the middle instantaneously. And it makes a difference. It changes the sort of signature that we have, I believe, at least in a relationship perspective, because it never leaves us.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. It's kind of interesting that, like, you and I have talked a little bit about this. I definitely feel, I guess, in, Buddhist thought or something, people develop their little karmic talents or whatever it is that they have. Everyone has this cachet of, skills that they've acquired over the course of their lifetimes, right? And I do feel like those people I'm connected with, I sort of know. I know very quickly. And I think you've talked about the same thing. It doesn't always have to be this intense thing, but oh, that's one of my people, like that's a person who I have some kind of something with. It goes back to what you're talking about before. If you make the concept too narrow, you're missing that there's more people beyond this one person that you have these interconnections with. But I feel like I know that pretty quickly. So that's one set of feelings I know certainly I've had. And I, in general, I've tended to feel like I'm kind of correct in that in the long run, right? Those people that I feel that I have a connection with, it will amount to something, at some point or another, and that could be, again, with friendships, or it could be something that was more romantic, or it could be whatever it is, right? Something that you're trying to accomplish with that person, or something that has a deeper meaning. And I found that to be a very profound part of my life. But I also had what you're talking about too, the part where you feel like a bolt of lightning went through the top of your head and your knees buckle. And, I actually had that thing. And I was like, oh, okay, this is something different. It's funny you were talking about it. It reminds me a little bit about when I did my first Zen retreat. There's kind of a Zen thing about sound. Sometimes it'll be sound that will be the trigger of, like, the change in the person, right? It'll shake something up in their mind, and in their consciousness and their spirit, poof, the sound. And I was doing the first long Zen retreat, and there was, at the end of the day of meditation, they kind of hit on this wooden percussion instrument. and they just bang it and bang it and bang it. And there was something about like it hit, and it was like I was kind of like split in half for a moment. It was a really interesting moment. I can still kind of like, feel it very clearly in my memory, this, and it was a very similar experience in, this connection with a person where something just went bang, and so there's something profound about that. And again, I guess I think if you haven't had that experience, you'd be like, well, hard to say. It's the same thing if you haven't had the experience of sitting Zen all day and have someone hit a wooden gong. You're not going to you'll be like, okay, I guess that's something. Well, of course, if you have it for yourself, it's different. Yeah.
So for those who are listening to this, if you haven't had that, we're going on a deep rant, and you're like, whatever, bro. I don't know what to do.
But we're trusting some people know about this, or at least you're curious, or you never know. Don't ask for whom the bell or the wooden gong tolls. It could be for you, my friend.
That's right.
You could be like me, walking around going, I know what the hell these dudes are talking about. Could be waiting around the corner for you. You just don't know. Well, I guess on the theoretical side, I did have a conversation with one of my Buddhist teachers about this. I asked, well, what's the Buddhist attitude about this? We have the Greeks, we have the great Kabbalists. What do the Buddhists think? And there's definitely a thing in Buddhism where there's no real conception of the soul being cut in half and someone looking for their other half. That isn't a thing. And I guess when I look at the metaphysics of it, I'm probably a little bit more inclined to think that way. But there was definitely this idea. Though I think the conversation was interesting. Basically, I posed the question and the answer became, well, there might be 4 people on the planet that you can have that kind of thing with. And I went, well, how many people are on the planet? 7 billion, So, but anyways, Buddhism has something about that, I suppose, that there'll be these profound connections between people. And I guess after we do the Rumi thing, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the Buddhist stories that are like this, because they do have Buddhist stories that are like this too. So, I guess the only other last little bit of theory, because I've talked with people who are like this too, there is the sort of whole twin souls, soulmate kind of a movement that's going on now, which again, if you know anything about it, you don't know anything about it, but I definitely have, and I didn't know anything about it, but I have talked with people about this. There's sort of a new age version of this too, just to acknowledge that, right? Where, again, it's a big thing around people searching for there are other parts of their soul. And I don't know what I think about that. Again, I don't want to discount anyone's, stuff, but, again, it's a little bit more, part of a little bit of a new agey subculture thing, and I know people who are really interested in that too. Do you know anyone who's interested in that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah.
So what do you think? Yeah. Some of it, I think, fits into the idea of people who are just longing for something. I mean, some of it might be that for sure, right?
Right. So one of the things we got, since we're gonna go on it, let's go in a little bit, right? So one of the things they like to talk about is a twin flame.
A twin flame. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's talk about
twin souls, twin flames. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it's even different than that. I think, so they call it twin flame. Twin flames are they say they're more we're mirror images of each other, and they're kind of past and their fears and their traumas and all their sort of life situations kind of resonate with each other, almost amplify. And they have kind of these different kind of relationships that are quite intense. That, and then they could also be some kind of telepathic or psychic. Doesn't have to be romantic by any stretch of the imagination. And they're very powerful in people's lives, and you're kind of pulled together, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's romantic.
Yeah, that's true.
They're just, you're kind of resonant. And so my experience with this is that, I've had maybe 1 or 2 people mentioned that I was their twin flame previously, and our relationship was extremely short-lived, relatively intense, relatively intense, but I wouldn't say we ended better for the wear. You know what I mean? I mean, of course, look, you learn from all of your experiences and to make your next relationship, your next experience improved. But, I certainly wouldn't call anybody twin, flame, soul, or any of those labels. And yet it's been given to me multiple times. So either I'm operating on multiple planes at once and I don't know about it, or perhaps these terms are being thrown about a little bit flippantly.
A little bit loosely. Yeah. You actually never talked with me about that you've had that kind of like,
yeah. Well, I'm being nice because we're recording,
You're being what? You're being what?
I said, I'm being nice because we're recording,
Yeah.
But I mean, look, you can feel an intense connection with a lot of people. Does that mean that there's some, soul level? I don't know. Who knows? I mean, we're just trying to put a description on things that are beyond description, which is very difficult to do. And you feel sometimes a deep connection with somebody, but they could be a total asshole.
I guess that does come up in that subculture a lot, where you see people kind of longing for someone that they have this connection with in their mind, but the person may be a little bit, personality disordered or something else wrong with them, and people get kind of screwed up right around that. I mean, that does seem to happen.
If I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna say that from my experience as a teacher and my experience as a person, when someone says that someone is their twin flame, it is generally an excuse for poor behavior.
Oh, interesting.
That's what I find. So someone says, "Oh, but they're my twin flame, so I can feel."
Oh, twin! It's an excuse for poor behavior on the part of the other person.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. As justification to say, well, we're growing together and I'm learning through their experiences too. I'm like, well, they're cheating on you all the time. So I guess you're supposed to learn fidelity through their infidelity. Like, I guess if we want to do that, we can do that, but then we got to do that with everything. And there are, some behaviors that are just unbecoming of a couple, you know what I mean? Twin flame or not.
Yeah. Or just like are pathological between people, right? So you don't want to go and say, okay, there's something pathological happening, but we're going to call it a twin flame, so it's okay, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think like in talking with people about this, I've had, again, I think because I had the experience, I've been a person that other people could talk to about this. So I have had something where people have been, described to me like, I had this really intense thing, and I've been like, okay, I understand that. I know what that's like,
mm-hmm.
And I've been able to talk with people about it from a place of, understanding, and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
While at the same time still acknowledging what you're talking about too, just because you feel that bond with that person and maybe they feel that bond with you too, doesn't mean that relationship is going to work out, or doesn't mean that, that person isn't going to be maybe incredibly flawed in ways, that you can either decide that you understand or don't understand, but you shouldn't put yourself in front of a runaway train,
mm-hmm.
Around this. You have to acknowledge, see the person clearly, see the person for who they are, right. And then, respond in a way that, maybe acknowledges the fact that you have this bond with this person, you feel this incredible love and bond for this person, but you're also realistic about who they are, and
mm-hmm.
Look at it through clear eyes. And you can kind of like learn to do both of those things at the same time, actually. And I suppose in my
mm-hmm.
conversations with people who've gone through this, that's been one of the things that's happened. And this is kind of just talking with people who are in love, right? You have to say to people, okay, you're in love and you can love that person. But you can also look at that person honestly, right? And see their flaws, or see, their struggles, and, acknowledge that part too. And then it's a more real way to love even, right?
Yeah. Well, it's using all of the various aspects of who we are as people to make an informed decision, right? So it's using your intuition and your feelings to say this is a good person or whatever. And then it's using your ability to just observe their behaviors and their actions in life and be like, oh yeah, and they're also a trustworthy individual, or a stand-up guy or gal, or whatever they identify as. And it doesn't mean, just because love is quote unquote blind, doesn't mean you should turn a blind eye to things that could be detrimental. Like, it just, that's how it is. So I, making a soft transition here, that's how we like to do on this show. I wanted to throw out a Rumi poem that I think would be nice. And so it talks about two kinds of intelligence. And he says that there are two kinds of intelligence. One acquired. As a child in school memorizes facts and concepts. With such intelligence, you rise in the world. There is another kind of tablet. One already completed and preserved inside of you. This other intelligence does not turn yellow or stagnate. It's fluid, and it doesn't move from outside to inside, through the conduits of plumbing and learning. This second knowing is a fountainhead from within you, moving out. And I think it sort of highlights my point of being able to have each kind of intelligence be active when you're choosing someone, whether they're a soulmate or just somebody you met, one night at a bar and you happen to keep hooking up with them, years later.
I think that when you take that Rumi thing and you kind of put that into translate into Buddhismese or something like that, what you end up with is that there's a value in things that you learn from your experiences, right? That are pedagogically being taught to you. And from your experiences, and there's a sort of a value in the sort of inherent intelligence that's there in what you might call like a Buddha nature or something like that, right? Your original Shen, and how you can kind of clearly see through things. And I suppose when you get to talking about love, you want to have both of those kinds of things operating, right? You want to have your, the deeper parts of your intuitive aspects of your mind going. You can kind of appreciate who the person is and the love and the depth of the connection you have with them. And you can also look at them kind of realistically too, right? Look at the outer parts, and that's the way that maybe you function in the world through love.
I want you to get together. I want you to get put your hands together one time. I want you to get together. I want you to get together.